All right. This is our second lecture for this afternoon, and it's What Healthy People Avoid. And it's chapter 14 in the book, The Healthiest People, and pages 171 to 178. And let's start with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, help us to quickly recognize what we should avoid and give us the strength to stay away from it. And if we are already habituated, give us the strength to break the habits that bind us to what's hurting us. And so help us to learn a lot in this lecture. In Jesus' name, amen. And it was advancing before, but it's not advancing now. And sometimes if I stop share and then start it again, it'll work okay. So I'm going to have to stop the share and share the screen again. And let's share that. And then let me click on this. Yes, okay. So the first thing that we have in the book that we should avoid is tobacco. And the reason I spend a lot of time on this is that I was the medical director of the United States Office on Smoking and Health for a couple of years and have done a lot of writing on tobacco and health. And this is current SDA smokers, and you can see that among the non-vegetarians, 2% of Seventh-day Adventists smoke cigarettes on a regular basis. When it comes to the semi-vegetarians, it's only 0.3%. Pesco-vegetarians, 0.4, and then 0.1% for your lacto-ovo and your vegans. And so how do we know that smoking is bad? This is very old kind of information, but it's good to think about what makes an association causal. And first, it should be statistically significant. And by that, we mean that it should be less than 5% likely to occur by chance. And if it was even more remote than that, the stronger the significance is. And then if there is consistency of the association that shows a dose-response relationship. So the more of a bad thing, the more disease. And if you can show that there's a dose response, that helps establish a causal relationship. And then if it's true on multiple populations, that makes it stronger. And if multiple investigators find the same thing, that makes it stronger. And then the strength or the magnitude of the association. So if something increases the likelihood by 20%, that may be significant, but if it increases the likelihood by 200% or 500%, then it's a stronger, more likely to be causal. Mm-hmm. And then the specificity of the association is important. And by that, I mean it doesn't have multiple causes. When it comes to heart attacks, it was a little hard to sort out the contribution of tobacco because blood pressure contributes to it, diet contributes to it, and personality contributes to it, and age does, and gender does, and family history does. And so to tease out the contribution made by smoking was harder because it wasn't as specific as it was with lung cancer, for instance. Mm-hmm. And then temporal relationships are important. Which came first, cigarette smoking or lung cancer? Well, smoking went up about 30 years before lung cancer did. And so there's an A-B relationship, mm-hmm. and it's important to see that. If what you are accusing as being a cause came up after the disease came up, kind of destroys your argument because the disease went up before the cause went up. And then the coherence of the association, and by that I mean if you have experimental data, if you have done studies on animals that show the same kind of thing that happens in humans, that strengthens it. And then if you can show that there are harmful chemicals that are known to do this, then that makes it stronger. For instance, bladder cancer, we've known for about 200 years that bladder cancer is caused by a chemical called beta-naphthalene. And guess what? Cigarette smoke has beta-naphthalene in it. So if cigarette smoke has beta-naphthalene and smokers get cancer of the bladder, who's surprised? Nobody's surprised. The chemical data was there before. It's a coherence of the association. And there are a lot of ways of measuring dose response. And you ought to, if you're doing a study, you ought to look into different ways of doing it. Obviously, the number of cigarettes smoked per day is one way. But then some people inhale deeply and some less deeply, so the depth of inhalation is important. And then if a person started smoking when they were 20, they have less exposure than if they started when they were 10. So age at initiation is good. And some people like to measure dose by the total lifetime number of cigarettes that a person smoked. One way to calculate that is the number of pack years. How many packs do you smoke now? How many years have you smoked that amount? And then there are cigarettes that have high tar and nicotine and low tar and nicotine. And what is the tar and nicotine level in the cigarettes that you use? And then filters are supposed to be beneficial. What's the difference between filter smokers and non-filter smokers? And then you have king-size cigarettes and regular cigarettes. And king-size cigarettes have more tobacco than regular cigarettes. So if you smoke king-size, you're going to get more tobacco. So you can see that when it comes to smoking, there are almost 10 different ways that you can measure a dose response. So let's look at lung cancer in several ways. Lung cancer, we look by the number of cigarettes per day. And you can see that people smoking 40 cigarettes a day, that's 2 packs. So 2 packs of cigarettes a day have a 1,800% increase in the risk of lung cancer. That's 18 times as much compared to non-smokers. So this is a very strong association. Even those smoking 1 to 9 cigarettes a day have 4.5 times as much lung cancer as those who don't smoke. So that's an extremely strong association. Let's look at age began smoking. If you started smoking before the age of 15, you're 18 times as likely to have lung cancer as non-smokers, and those who started smoking 25 or later are only 5 times as much likely, which is a 500% increase. And so you can see that age that began smoking is very critical here. And then let's look at inhalation. There are people that say they inhale none or slight, and that may be true. And they only have 8 times as much lung cancer. That's an 800% increase for not inhaling very much. But if you inhale moderately or deeply, you have 17 times as much lung cancer compared to non-smokers. So degree of inhalation is another dose response. Looking at tar and nicotine levels, you can see that it makes a little difference. Low tar and nicotine cigarettes have a 20% reduction in lung cancer compared to those with high tar and nicotine levels. And if you quit smoking, does it make any difference? Yes. Notice, however, that those who have quit 1 to 4 years actually have more lung cancer than those who don't. And but 5 to 9 years, it's dropped to 7 times. 10 to 14 years, you're still 4 times as likely to get lung cancer. Even at 20 years, you're twice as likely to get lung cancer compared to non-smokers. So there are some effects of smoking that never go away. And just to interrupt here and say that the risk of a heart attack, it cuts in half overnight. So within 24 hours, so the biggest benefit from quitting smoking comes in a reduction of heart disease. And the degree of emphysema that you have never gets better. So the degree of emphysema you have when you quit, you keep that for the rest of your life. So when a person says, how soon will I get better? The answer is, if we're talking about emphysema, you never get better. If we're talking about lung cancer, it takes 10 years to drop to 5 times. If you talk about heart disease, there's a quick benefit. In 48 hours, your risk is cut in half. So the tobacco industry said, well, your statistics can't be good because it's bad to quit smoking. Because if you quit smoking, your risk of dying of lung cancer goes up. And it turns out to be that a lot of people who get lung cancer quit smoking. So in that less than 1 to 4 years, there are a lot of people that quit smoking because they were sick. They were sick with lung cancer, but if you divide out those who quit for the sake of good health from those who quit because they were sick, the risk of lung cancer goes down very quickly. And so these are some of the cancers caused by cigarette smoking. Cancer of the lung, larynx, that's your voice box, your mouth, your throat, your esophagus, your pancreas, your bladder, your cervix, your colon, your liver, and acute myeloid leukemia. Cardiovascular diseases and tobacco. You can get angina pectoris, which is a pre-heart attack type of pain. Heart attacks, strokes, aneurysms, peripheral vascular disease, all caused by cigarette smoking. Lung diseases, emphysema, chronic bronchitis, and they're lumped together as chronic obstructive lung disease. And if you add up the cancers, the heart disease, the lung disease, there are 400,000 premature deaths in the United States every year. And if you divide that out by 365, you come up with about 600, 700, 800. And so that's the same as about 4 jumbo jets crashing every day. And nobody is worried about it. And it's all due to cigarette smoke. So cigarette smoke is the most dangerous cause of premature death in the United States today. So what makes tobacco so bad? Well, when burned, cigarettes create more than 7,000 chemicals. And at least 70 of these chemicals are known to cause cancer in humans and animals and are toxic in many other ways. The last count is actually up to about 98 cancer-causing chemicals in cigarettes. And some of the chemicals caused in the burning, and I put this in for a specific reason. These cancer-causing chemicals have multiple chemical rings in them. And in chemistry, anything with a ring has an unusual smell, and they're called aromatic, whereas long-chain carbons usually don't smell as much. And so these are called polyaromatic hydrocarbons because they have multiple rings in them. And all of these are found in cigarette smoke, and all of them look bad. Not a one of them is good for you. And there are about 100 of these polyaromatic hydrocarbons produced in the burning of cigarettes. Let me show you another polyaromatic hydrocarbon. This one is called ellagic acid, and this prevents cancer. This is found in vegetables, and it's a polyaromatic hydrocarbon. It's very interesting. See these hydroxyl group, the OH groups? The OH groups in this molecule are all on one side of this flat molecule. This molecule is fat like a piece of paper, and all of the hydroxyl groups are on one side, which means that one side of it is soluble in water, but the other side is soluble in fat. And so what happens is this compound loves polyaromatic hydrocarbons. So it will go up and make a sandwich. So you can get one polyaromatic hydrocarbon with an ellagic acid on each side, and suddenly it becomes water soluble. You can eliminate it in your urine and get rid of it. So the more ellagic acid you have in your diet, the less likely you are to die. And isn't it wonderful that God put a healthy aromatic hydrocarbon? Every one that humans make is dangerous, but the ones that God make help save our lives. And ellagic acid is found naturally, and the highest sources are in strawberries, raspberries, blackberries, cherries, and walnuts. And so if a person can't stop smoking, they ought to at least eat a lot of fruit because it will help reduce their risk of developing cancer. Now, another really bad chemical in cigarette smoke and the reason I put this one in is because these chemicals are found in tobacco leaf. These are not made in the process of burning. And these are called N-nitrosamines. And in each one of these molecules, you can see that there are 2 nitrogens together. And there's an oxygen molecule off of one of the 2. And so these are called N-nitrosamines. And this is why unburned tobacco causes cancer. So if you put tobacco leaf in your mouth, it will cause mouth cancer because of the N-nitrosamines that naturally exist in tobacco. But it is true that in the process of burning, additional N-nitrosamines are created in the process of burning. So there is a larger family that is made by burning tobacco, but unburned tobacco has cancer-causing chemicals in it. Now let's talk about types of tobacco. And tobacco is marketed in many, many different ways. We're very familiar with cigarettes, but there are cigars, and then there are little cigars, and cigars are defined by the Internal Revenue Service because they are taxed, and cigars are defined as a roll of tobacco wrapped in tobacco, and cigarettes are defined as a roll of tobacco wrapped in paper. And they're taxed differently. Now, at the moment, they're taxed the same, but there was a time when little cigars were taxed much cheaper, and the cigarette companies then mixed a few tobacco leaves with their paper making machine, started making little cigars on cigarette machines, and sold them for 25 cents a pack compared to the high dollar cigarettes. And we had to start some legislation when I was with the government to get these classified as cigarettes, which they eventually were. Then you have chewing tobacco, and chewing tobacco is nothing more than putting a big wad of tobacco leaves in your mouth. And as you chew on them, you release a lot of tobacco juice, but you release a lot of nicotine, and you suck in the nicotine. And so there's a way of making this much more efficient, and that is by powdering unburned tobacco. And if you powder it, it becomes very fine, and it doesn't take very much. And here is a gentleman that's sniffing some tobacco powder, and you can snuff it. And but most common, they put just a little pinch of this snuff inside their lower lip. And this guy's got a little bulge in his lower lip where he's put a little bit of his Copenhagen. And you notice there's a warning right on the can saying it causes gum disease and tooth loss. It causes cancer of the mouth as well. And then here is a form of tobacco that you've probably never seen, but it's tobacco toothpaste. You can buy this in Canada, you can buy it in India, and in this particular brand, there is both coffee and tobacco, but notice it also has a little bit of vitamin E in it, so this enhances the health quality of it. I was flying to Kuwait once sitting next to a family, an Indian family living in Toronto, and he pulled out this tobacco toothpaste and asked me if it was harmful to his health. And I said, well, that's very interesting because, you know, you don't inhale it. And he says, yeah, it's not in your mouth very long. I said, there's one good way to tell. I said, the best way to do it is to check your pulse before you brush your teeth. And then when you brush your teeth with this, you're rubbing nicotine into your gums. And then check your heart rate when you're done and see what the difference is. And my prediction is your heart rate will be way up, your blood pressure will be way up. He says, I don't have to do the test. And I said, why not? And he says, when I use that, my heart's going like this. And I said, yeah, it's bad for you. Believe me, stop it. And now there is a difference between mainstream smoke and side stream smoke. And mainstream smoke is the smoke that goes through the cigarette, through the filter and into your mouth. And when you draw on a cigarette and take an inhalation, the coal at the end of it lights up much brighter, and the temperature in the coal goes up much higher, and combustion is much more complete. And so the truth is the smoke that drifts up from the side stream actually has more cancer-causing chemicals in it than mainstream. And it's also true that many of the chemicals that you draw through the cigarette are deposited on the tobacco in the unburned portion of the cigarette and in the filter. So if you want to make cigarette smoking much less hazardous, it's much better to smoke just the first half of the cigarette, because in the last half of the cigarette, you're remobilizing all of the cancer-causing chemicals that were deposited on the tobacco during the first half of the cigarette. Now, even though side stream smoke is much more malignant than mainstream smoke, it's really not that much of a hazard to non-smokers because you're not sitting there with your nose over side stream smoke. It's being diluted in the room and with a fan, and so although side stream smoke makes your clothes smell bad, the truth is it's not nearly as potent a cancer-causing agent as mainstream smoke is. But people have made a big issue about that. And I think that everyone has a right to breathe clean air, and I can tell you that the fight to get rid of smoking in public places was a very long fight that was fought industry by industry, city by city, town by town, and state by state, because the federal government would never do it. But now smoking is very unpopular. Well, I'm going to get deeper yet into the chemistry, and I'm going to do it for an important reason here that will help you explain things. This is nicotine, but nicotine exists in 3 different phases, and in the acidic phase, and let's just go to this one. In the acidic phase, which is on the right, nicotine becomes ionized. And you see those 2 positive charges off of the nitrogen? If nicotine is positively charged, it can be absorbed through water, but not lipid membranes. In neutral, it's got 1 positive charge, but in alkaline, it has no charges. And if nicotine has no charges, it can be absorbed through lipid-rich membranes. And so let's read the one on the left. In alkaline smoke, because the smoke of pipes and cigars is alkaline, because those tobaccos have been aged for a year or more, and all of the sugars have been digested by organisms, and you are just left with the alkaloids, so the smoke is very alkaline, and it is not ionized. That means it can be absorbed very easily through the mucous membranes of the mouth. Your cheeks, your tongue can absorb it. So pipe and cigar smokers absorb nicotine through their mouth. They do not need to inhale the smoke to get the nicotine. Now, when you burn sugars, you get kind of an acid smoke. So the bright tobaccos that are flue cured in cigarettes, the smoke is acidic. And acidic smoke is not irritating to the bronchial tree. You can inhale it deeply. And cigarette smoke, the nicotine is not absorbed from the mouth, from the gums, from the tongue, from the cheeks. It's only absorbed from the lungs. And so a cigarette smoker has to inhale to absorb nicotine, whereas pipe and cigar smokers do not need to inhale to absorb nicotine. And the alkaline smoke of pipes and cigars is very irritating, and a person who has always only smoked cigars will never inhale. And pipe smokers never inhale, they just puff. And they get all the nicotine they need from puffing. And so there is a difference between unionized and ionized nicotine, and it depends on the pH of the smoke. And if a cigar smoker says, oh, Rush Limbaugh was a cigarette smoker for many years and he switched to cigars. And people who used to smoke cigarettes, who switched to cigars, will force themselves to inhale some of the smoke. And Rush Limbaugh is dying right now of lung cancer. And his lung cancer is from his former cigarette smoking, but his continued cigar smoking. But he defends himself on air by claiming his formerly nicotine-stained fingers. Well, you know, it doesn't make any difference. He got just as much nicotine as a cigar smoker as he ever got as a cigarette smoker. And he got the same cancer-causing chemicals in his mouth, and if he inhaled them, he got them in his lungs. So too bad, goodbye. He's not going to live a lot longer. But he was given the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which he brags about quite often. I don't listen to Rush Limbaugh, okay? But I happen to know about his cancer. So I just explained all of this, except the bottom one. the blood levels of chewers and dippers is high because the nicotine content of unburned tobacco is 10 times higher than a cigarette smoke. Because burning tobacco destroys a lot of the nicotine. Nicotine is burned up in the process of smoking. So you really don't get a lot of nicotine in the smoke, but if you put the unburned tobacco in your mouth, you get a ton of nicotine. So it turns out that if you check the blood level of nicotine in cigarette smokers, pipe smokers, cigar smokers, snuff dippers, and tobacco leaf chewers, they all have the same level of nicotine. Nicotine is an addicting substance, and no matter how you dose it, there is no safe way of dosing it. All tobacco users have the same level of nicotine. So how about quitting smoking? What about cutting down and tapering off or cold turkey? Well, it turns out that cutting down never works. Cold turkey works much better. But all who got off by quitting cold turkey tried cutting down first. And so when a person tells me they're going to quit by cutting down, I always say, okay, that's fine. And what I'm really saying in my mind is you're an immature smoker because you haven't found out yet that cutting down doesn't work. And so once you find out that cutting down doesn't work and you get good and angry about the habit and you get more desperate, you're going to realize that the only way to get rid of this is to get rid of it all at the same time, and you'll do it and it'll work. And so don't be critical of people that want to quit by cutting down. You can tell them it doesn't work very well because it doesn't, but they're not prepared to quit cold turkey yet. So there used to be very popular group smoking cessation plans. One of the oldest was the 5-day plan to stop smoking, started by Seventh-day Adventists. Wayne McFarland and Elman Falkenberg back in 1964. And I'm just going to leave it at that. There were millions of people that attended that program around the world. God was never mentioned, prayer was never offered, it was rarely done in the church, it was not health evangelism, and it was because of the failure of programs like the 5-day plan that the church has given up. We used to have temperance people in every church, temperance leaders in every union, in every conference. And there was a big fight between temperance ministries and health ministries that occurred at some time in the past, and I can talk to you about it. But the truth is, the 5-day plan needed to be replaced. Stowe Proctor came up with Breathe Free in 1985. And when I was at the General Conference, I was the international director of Breathe Free. I can tell you it was an encyclopedia of all of the quitting ways that people have ever used. It was also very secular, had no prayer, wasn't done in church, and I was disappointed with it. Now they have Breathe Free too. I've never looked at it, was not a reviewer of it. And then in '69, there was Smoke Enders. It was very popular, a very effective program because they charged a lot of money. And it turns out that the more you charge for a program, the more successful you'll be. And it is not because your program is any better, it's because a high cost filters out of the population those who are highly motivated. If they're willing to lay down $200 or $500, that is a measure of their motivation. It's not a measure of how good your program is, but they will be successful because they're motivated. And now you can get a free program. The Lung Association, Freedom from Tobacco. Cancer Society has one, Heart Association has one, the National Heart, Lung, and Blood has one. There are many group cessation. Nobody goes to groups anymore. The smoking cessation is moved out of groups into the doctor's office. And one of the ways of smoking cessation that is popular is nicotine replacement. And there are ways of replacing nicotine. Vaping is one. Vaping makes a lot of water vapor into which you can have nicotine. And I can always tell the difference between cigarette smoke and vaping because vaping makes a huge cloud of water vapor. And then on vaping side, The positive side of vaping is that in vaping you lose 7,000 chemicals. All you have is water and nicotine if you get a plain one. You lose 79 carcinogens, so vaping is not carcinogenic. And you can adjust the nicotine level and make it lower and lower. And it's certainly much less hazardous for a smoker than tobacco smoke. But on the negative side, it's a little too much exactly like smoking. You have the same hand-mouth kind of thing. You're still getting nicotine, which is addicting. And it's become very popular with young people because it's legal and it's a gateway drug. Kids who start with vaping will move to marijuana or move to cigarettes or move to other things. And then there are a lot of people who have adulterated the cartridges with vitamin E and other lipid things that gives you lipoid pneumonia and can do a lot of lung damage. And it is addictive. And so young kids can get addicted to it. And I've known smokers who gave up cigarettes but remained addicted for years to vaping. And I'm not particularly proud of that, and it's difficult to stop. But to a person who's smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day, vaping is a less hazardous alternative, and I've recommended it to many heavy smokers. Before vaping came around, there were Nicotrol inhalers that had cartridges that had nicotine in them, but it was not heated, and it didn't give you much of a vapor. You had to suck pretty hard on it, and it would give you a little bit of nicotine. And it looked a little bit like a cigarette, but these have been around for probably 20 years and were never very popular. And then there was nicotine nasal spray, and in the last 30 years, I've never known anybody to use this product. It is still on the market. You can spray a little spray up your nose, and it gives you nicotine, but nicotine's irritated. You get a runny nose, and it's not a good way to dose nicotine. Then there's nicotine gum. And nicotine gum is nicotine in a resin, 4 milligrams per thing, and you chew it. This is the actual size there. And the best way to use nicotine gum is to chew it till you just taste the nicotine, then park it. And you gotta wait 2 minutes for it to soak in and give you what you're looking for from nicotine. Got to remember that people that smoke a cigarette, they're getting a hit in their brain in 7 seconds. So if a smoker switches to nicotine gum, they're always disappointed because the nicotine hit doesn't get there fast enough. But I recommend nicotine gum for dippers and chewers because it's a lot better than snuff and it's a lot better than chewing tobacco. It has no cancer-causing chemicals, no N-nitrosamine, and they already know how to dose it, because they know how to chew and park, they're familiar with it, and this can be a good intermediate step moving towards quitting. And then they have lozenges, and I think that might be good. These are newer, and I think that if you're in a place where you can't smoke and you're trying to quit, popping one of these little lozenges in your mouth may be helpful. Then there's nicotine patches, and these have been very popular. They come in multiple strengths, and the nicotine soaks in over 24 hours. I'm frankly not very excited about patches because the nicotine blood level is low and it's flat. And cigarette smokers get those hits of nicotine every time they breathe in. And I told the makers of nicotine patches they ought to make one that you could slap with your hand and rub to get a hit now and then when you have a nicotine craving. But you don't get the spikes that you would if you were smoking. And I tell patients to take them off at night because you develop nicotine tolerance within 24 hours if you don't take it off at night, and they don't work as well the next day. And then I have told patients who like to use patches that they ought to use some other short-acting nicotine, either nicotine gum or nicotine lozenge, so that if they got absolutely desperate for a smoke, they wouldn't go by. They can take a little nicotine and a little gum, and maybe that would help them if the patch isn't giving them stuff. Now, there are drugs. There are 2 drugs that are approved by the Food and Drug Administration. One is Chantix, varenicline tartrate, and this is a drug that blocks the alpha-4 beta-2 nicotinic acetylcholine receptors in the brain, and it makes you want to stop smoking. And I have had many people quit smoking with this. it has a bad side effect profile. So I would say my experience with it is less than half of the people that I give this to ever finish it. They take it for a day or two or three and they quit because they can't stand the side effects. But the other half of the people don't have the side effects and it works great for them. They do not want to smoke, and I encourage people to take this drug for at least 3 months because that gives them a 3-month window. There are people that have taken it and stopped smoking in 2 weeks and then stopped the Chantix. Well, guess what? There are cravings that come around the end of the month. There are cravings that come around when you go to the dentist, cravings that come around when you go to a funeral. And you really need to have 3 months distance between cigarettes and quitting before you can really say you're really off that well. And so Chantix, I recommend it. If you're going to use that and you like it and you can take it, you need to take it for 3 months. Zyban, bupropion, is licensed for smoking cessation, and it's an antidepressive drug. And it works very well in attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. I have a grandson that takes that. And it is a norepinephrine dopamine reuptake inhibitor, NDRI, and it's very interesting because it doesn't help you stop smoking. What does it do? It prevents relapse. There's a difference between stopping and relapsing. And there are a lot of people that will stop smoking, but then they'll get into an anxiety situation, they'll get upset, they'll get depressed, and if you're on Zyban, you'll tend to roll with the punches so that things don't upset you as much. You're not embarrassed about things, as I mentioned yesterday. This affects your brain in such a way that things don't bother you nearly as much. So it's kind of useful in people that quit smoking. And now let's talk about the success rate with these drugs. Nicotine replacement, whether you're using vaping or patches or lozenges or the gum or Chantix or Zyban, the success with all of them is the same, and it doubles your chance of success. But what is the chance of success with any given quitting rate? The chance of success with any given quitting rate, any method, any time you try, your success rate is between 10 and 20%. So all of the people that are off of cigarettes now had to try 5 or 6 times before they were successful. And all of the people that are smoking now that have tried to quit have only tried 2 or 3 times, and then they quit trying. So what does this mean? This means that the success rate of Chantix goes from 20% to 40%. Zyban goes from 20% to 40%. Nicotine gum goes from 20% to 40%. So what this tells you is that all of these means of trying to stop smoking are less than 50% effective. Less than 50%. And so you need to be patient with people that are trying to quit smoking. The success rate with any single attempt is not great. And all of these aids that we have to help people quit smoking double their chance of success, but 2 times a low number is still a low number. And so you need to realize that all of these are very limited. And I have had people that have said, I asked God to help me quit smoking, and I threw my cigarettes down, I never had any craving, and I haven't smoked since. Now, I can't promise you that God's going to take away all your craving, but I can promise you that if you ask God to help you quit smoking, there will be no craving beyond what you're able to bear. And God will, with the craving, provide a way of escape. Now we're going to go to about 10 after. Is that okay? Because we started at 23 after. Maybe I'll go to 15 after. So there are other cures that are bogus. They have injections of some vitamin and bicarbonate that they give around your nose and around your ear. And then there's hypnosis. And then you can bet money that you can quit. There is a gambling thing that you can bet anything. and you pay in $5 a week or 10 or 50, whatever you want to pay in. And if you stay off for 6 months, you get a big cash back. And the cash you get back is the cash you put in plus the cash from all the people that failed. Because if you don't quit in 6 months, you can give the money up. And so this is a sure way to make an awful lot of money if you're successful in quitting smoking. I don't recommend that for gambling people. I don't recommend hypnosis. And I had a patient come to me and say, "Doctor, I quit smoking." And I go, "Oh, how'd you do it?" "Well, I paid $125, got the little injections around my nose and ears, went home, never wanted another cigarette." And what do you say to a person like that? You say, "Oh, you quit the wrong way. I'm sure sorry about that." You never say that. There's no, if you get off of cigarettes, there is no wrong way to quit smoking. Cigarette smoking is so bad for you that no matter how a patient told me they got off cigarettes, I congratulate them. It's a major life accomplishment. It's like learning to ride a bike. It is great. And so anytime a person quits smoking, I always congratulate them. It's the best thing you can do for your health. It'll add more years to your life than anything else you can do. Mrs. White said tobacco is a poison, the most deceitful and malignant kind. Yes, most malignant. You saw all those cancers having an exciting then paralyzing influence on the nerves of the body. It is all the more dangerous because the effects on the system are so slow and at first scarcely perceptible. It takes 30 years of smoking for it to kill you. Multitudes have fallen victims to its poisonous influence. Yeah, 400,000 a year die prematurely. All right, come to alcohol. Daily alcohol drinks in Seventh-day Adventists. We looked at a little bit of this the other day. But the non-vegetarians, 1.3% have alcohol every day. Semi-vegetarians, 0.3, pesco-vegetarians, 0.5%. Even the vegans, 0.1% drink some every day. And this is the actual number of people in the Adventist Health Study who drink every day. Among the non-vegetarians, there are 470 of them. Semi-vegetarians, 14. Vegans, 3. So 3 vegans out of that population have an alcoholic drink every day. And then if we look at the alcohol drinking by percent, what percent of that group of Seventh-day Adventists do drink? And you can see that 83% of all Adventists, regardless of what group they're in, 83% never drink. These are the non-vegetarians. 83% of the non-vegetarians never drink. 7.5% rarely, 3% monthly, 4% weekly, 1.3% daily. If you look at the non-vegetarians, alcohol drinking, none by the absolute number. The non-vegetarians, we got 29,000 that never drink, and we only have 470 non-vegetarian Adventists that drink daily. Lacto-ovo-vegetarians, 96.8% never drink, 0.2% drink daily, and the actual number who drink daily of the lacto-ovo-vegetarians is 41. If we look at weekly alcohol by the group, you can see that the non-vegetarians, 4.7 drink weekly, and these are less often than daily, okay? They drink once a week, so these are your weekend people. So about 5% of non-vegetarian Adventists drink weekly. Pesco-vegetarians, it's about 2%, as with the semi-vegetarians. Get down to the vegans, and it's 0.3%. And here's SDA wine usage by age. And this is not done with the Adventist Health Study. This is done by Dwayne McBride long ago, and it needs to be repeated. But when he did a survey of 2,319 Seventh-day Adventist American homes, he found that those who were 18 to 29, 27% used wine on a regular basis. Those 30 to 42, it was 20%. Those 43 to 64, it was 10%. And those 65 and over, it was about 4%. So let me ask you, when these 18 to 29-year-olds become 30 to 42, do you think their alcohol drinking is going to drop from 27 to 19? No, it's going to stay the same. And when the 30 to 42 move over to 43 to 64, it's going to go up from 9% to 19%. And when the 43 to 64 becomes 65, it's going to go up from 3.6 to 9.4. So wine drinking is a progressive problem among Seventh-day Adventists. And if we look at Academy seniors, they have been surveyed, and 42% of Academy seniors have never used alcohol. 35% of Adventist Academy seniors use alcohol currently. 22% have used it in the past. So alcohol use is becoming a popular use, and most of the time this is beer. Sometimes it's wine or wine coolers. But alcohol use among Seventh-day Adventists is becoming increasingly popular. There was a day when you remember that jewelry among Seventh-day Adventists was a no-no, and that's kind of gone by the wayside. And conservative clothing used to be in and risque clothing, and now we don't have any clothing standards anymore. And jewelry was a thing of the past. Jewelry is now, we don't make any moves or comments about jewelry. So the truth is, in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, these things that used to be taboo in the past have been flooding into the church. And at this rate, in another 20, 30, 40, 50 years, beer drinking will be acceptable among Seventh-day Adventists. We'll serve wine at potluck and things like that because it'll be acceptable. We accept everything else among Seventh-day Adventists who come to church. It's a very sad day. No alcohol drinks. And these are the percentage that don't drink alcohol at all among Seventh-day Adventists. And that's kind of encouraging. The Bible on alcohol: wine is a mocker, strong drink is a brawler, and whoever is led aside is not wise. But alcohol in the Bible has an interesting history. There are two kinds of alcohol in the Bible: wine and strong drink. Strong drink in the Bible is always beer, because they never had distilled beverages. All they had was beer. Beer had to be, it never happened accidentally. You had to brew beer intentionally in order for it to form. And it's always condemned in the Bible. So beer use in the Bible is always condemned. Wine, on the other hand, unfermented grape juice was the primary product of Scripture. And it is said that the Jews used to boil grape juice down, and boiled down grape juice concentrate will not ferment because the sugar content is so high. But fresh grape juice will become alcoholic over time, and it's produced by some people intentionally, but it could certainly be produced accidentally as well. And if you line up all the Bible texts about wine in a row, about a third of the texts are pro-wine, a third of the texts are neutral, and about a third of the texts are against wine. And it's we have several good Adventist books written about it, and I suspect that the third of the texts against wine are against wine that was fermented, and the texts that are pro-wine is for unfermented wine, but we have no way of actually knowing that. But Mrs. White says, press home the temperance question with all the force of the Holy Spirit's unction. Show the need of total abstinence from all intoxicating liquor. Show the terrible harm that is wrought in the human system by the use of tobacco and alcohol. And it's 12 after. I'm going to go ahead and finish this lecture. We'll then take a 10-minute break. Marijuana, and this is not on Seventh-day Adventists. I don't have any Seventh-day Adventist data, but this is high school completion by marijuana use. For those who never use marijuana among high school students, 80% will graduate. Those that use marijuana about monthly, 64% will finish high school. Of those that use marijuana daily, only about half will finish high school. And if you look at psychotic disorders, psychotic breaks that require admission, it depends on the amount of THC, which is tetrahydrocannabinol. And if we make the rate of psychotic disorders 1 in those who've never used marijuana, if the people use it weekly and use less than 10% THC, the number of breaks goes up by 71%. If they use marijuana weekly, but use a high THC content, it's doubled. If they use marijuana daily but low THC, the risk is tripled. And if they smoke daily and use a high concentration THC, the risk of a psychotic break goes up about sixfold or 600%. So marijuana puts you in risk for a psychotic break. And here we have adult illicit drug use by adolescent marijuana use. Now these are people, all of them, except for the nevers, never used marijuana as a child and never used illegal drug use as an adult. But if they rarely used marijuana as an adolescent, there's an 80% increase in the use of illegal drugs as an adult. If they use marijuana monthly, then there is a 3.3-fold increase of using illegal drugs as adults. If they use marijuana weekly, sixfold, that's 600% increase. And if they use marijuana daily in adolescent, they have 10 times the increase in the use of illegal drugs as adults. If we look at attempted suicide by adolescent marijuana use, those who use it rarely have a 70% increase in the likelihood of suicide attempts compared to those who never use marijuana. Monthly marijuana users are about 3 times as likely to try to kill themselves. Those that use marijuana weekly, 5 times as likely to try to kill themselves. And those who use marijuana daily as an adolescent are about 9 times as likely to try to kill themselves as people that never used marijuana. Guess what? That must have been the end. We will take a 10-minute break. It is exactly 7:15 here, which is what, 3:15? And so let's come back at 3:25.
All right, we'll see you in 10.
Okay.